lined up at 11. But before one more word is done, will you join me in warmly welcoming to this wonderful place my friend Salam al-Marayati. So he's coffeed up, he's pastryed up. Let's go to town. So what in the world is being a moderate Muslim today?
Well, I think the idea is that we believe that Islam is a universal religion, not an Arab faith. And one of the major misconceptions that many people have, especially here in America, is that if you're Muslim, then, well, that's that Arab culture, that Arab religion. First of all, Jesus wasn't born in the Bronx, he was born in the Middle East. So, and Moses wasn't born in Paris, he was born in the Middle East. So when we talk about Middle Eastern faiths, we're talking about the three major monotheistic faiths. But Islam is somehow is held hostage to events of the Middle East and perceptions of the Middle East and our own misunderstandings of the Middle East, because that's another conversation we can have about the people of that region. But the idea is that Islam is a universal religion meant for 21st century America as much as it was meant for 7th century Arabia. And Islam is also a religion that is part of the monotheistic Abrahamic faiths, that we're all followers of Abraham, that Abraham had two sons, Isaac and Ishmael. We in the West look at Isaac and look at that line of prophets that ended up with Jesus, and we don't look at the line of Ishmael. And so we believe in that Abrahamic understanding, and therefore there's that extremist mentality now on the Muslim side that says, well, you know, Christians and Jews are not real monotheists, that they are infidels. And we want to go back to the classical Islamic tradition of all jurists that says that Christians and Jews are people of the book. And that is exactly what the Quran says about those people who were given revelation by God. And so, for example, we believe in Jesus and the Virgin Mary and the message and the miracles of Jesus, but the Quran also tells us that Jesus is the Word of God. So he is the embodiment of the gospel. And a Muslim is supposed to believe in the Torah and the gospel as predecessors to the Quran, that the message of God was given in stages, not given in one setting to one people, but given in different settings so that it could be shared by all people. And God says, to each of you, in the Quran, chapter 5, to each of you we have made a different way. If it were God's will, he would have made us all in one people. However, he will give you the different revelations and test you with that revelation. So vie with one another in doing good work. And then you will be gathered back to God in the afterlife, and he will explain what all these differences were about. So God is telling us, don't get entangled in the theological differences. And I think you know, and I know, Ed, that there are more differences within our faiths than there is between the two faiths.
Right.
So don't get entangled in that. Keep your eye on the big picture. Believe in God, believe in the human family, and then go and do good work. So in essence, what we mean by the moderate Muslims or reform of Muslims is to go back to the ethics of Islam and not be so fixated on the dogmas that we hear from different religious political parties. So whether we're talking about political Islam or Christian fundamentalism or right-wing Israeli settlements and propaganda there, they're all the same. They all want to use religion as a vehicle for power. To us, religion is a vehicle for peacemaking. And therefore, we have to have that Abrahamic understanding. And we American Muslims believe that reform not only can start in America, but should start from America, because we Muslims in America are free. Muslims abroad are either living in ghettos, or they are living under occupation, or they're subjected to genocide in Myanmar, or in concentration camps in China. Muslims in America are free. So we have that freedom now to go back to the text and look at really what is the message for American Islam that can be that light for world Islam, much like American Jewry was that light for world Jewry. So we have an opportunity here, and that's what we mean by beginning the, or developing that embryo of moderate thinking when it comes to Islam.
When you said the word reform, it reminded me of this wonderful moment when you had Karen Armstrong. Salam really treks with the stars, I'm here to tell you.
Well, I'm here with you.
Be it scholars or Hollywood, and they recognized Karen Armstrong, who's a marvelous, marvelous writer about theology. And in her speech, she said that she is a world-class religious historian. And she said, Islam, I've been all over the world, Islam is going through a reformation. And the epicenter of it is right here with impact. So when Salam is talking about the reform of Islam throughout the world and how important it is for it to be in the U.S., he's not only saying that, touting it, but he's also doing it. So I'm really, really grateful to have him here. So please, the next question is about New Zealand. And it's a two-level question. One, I'd just love for us to have a taste of what your life is like. Because my experience of your life from a bed outside is absolutely every crisis that happens, every piece of controversy that takes place, you have to tweet out and send out all sorts of press responses, etc. And you have to show up everywhere and calm people down. Could you just talk about what your life has been like since Friday morning? And then the second part of the question, and if you want to rest and I'll pose it again, will be about and this is my sermon this morning, the worldwide movement of white nationalism and white supremacy that's giving rise to all that. But first, just talk a little bit about your life since Friday morning.
Well, since Friday morning, I think the first thing that we had to deal with is this idea of, well, should we go to mosque or not? Because for Muslims, the Friday prayer is the one prayer where we're supposed to be in congregation. We pray 5 times a day, and these prayers are done alone. It's you and your Creator. So you're connecting to your Creator, which is actually the definition of Salah, is connecting. So we have that 5 times a day. On Fridays, we're told you cut your prayer in half and go to be among one another to talk about the affairs of the community and to remind yourselves about the day of judgment, that there is an afterlife. And everybody should be held accountable to what they're doing in this life, and they will be judged in the next life. So that is the purpose of the Jummah prayer, and that's why you find the mosques full on Fridays. And there were some people asking us, well, are you going to attend your Friday prayer after what happened in New Zealand? And we said, oh yeah, we're going. We're not going to be intimidated by these terrorists. We're going to stand tall against hate and stand together as one community. And that was the message that we sent out to our community. And in fact, at our mosque, and I'm sure in all the mosques, it was packed. People responded by saying, we're not going to be cowered by this. We're not going to be intimidated by this. We're going to practice our faith and go to Friday prayer. We call it Jummah prayer. Then the second thing, obviously, is what is the message that we tell our children? How are they going to process all this? And the reality is there is evil in the world. Ever since Cain killed Abel, we had to ask the question, why? Why do human beings do this to one another? Why is there murder? And why is murder also wrapped in racist an extremist ideology. It's because, number one, we have to remember Satan was the first racist. When he said, I am better than Adam because I'm made out of fire and he's made out of clay, that is racism. When somebody says, I'm better because of what I'm made of, what I look like. So that is a satanic impulse that we have to fight each and every day. And if we don't contain it as a society, if we don't recognize it as a danger, then it will unfortunately take over our society and consume us. And I'm worried that incidents like what happened in New Zealand is that spark. And I think this is a very important point here. This is part of an organized movement. It is not an isolated incident like the president wants to really minimize it as such. First of all, he says, well, the guy is a deranged person. Well, every terrorist is deranged. There's no terrorist who is of sound mind. They have a warped idea of the world and a warped mentality, and they may use religion, and to them, religion is about power. It's not about serving God. It's not about the ethics. It's about trying to drive an ideology on others, and we see that, unfortunately, too much in religion today. And so this is part of an organized movement, and when we see New Zealand, we as Americans must remember there was Charleston, there was Pittsburgh, there was Oak Creek, and that was exactly the same situation. It was a white supremacist terrorist that attacked a house of worship and decided that whatever group he was attacking, that they were to be blamed for the problems that he was facing and problems of the world. So he was scapegoating them and using violence against worshipers. And it happened in Quebec too, by the way, against Muslims 2 years ago. So there's been a string of events, and I've been involved, I think Ed knows this, in intervening in intervention programs for Muslims who were being recruited by ISIS to join ISIS. So we had an intervention program that would bring therapists, religious counselors, people to teach them this is not religion that they're teaching you. That's a warped view of religion. This is what the religion is. It is about achieving peace. It is about using nonviolent means in any kind of resistance, especially when you have the opportunity that we have here in America. So we had an intervention program. It was called Safe Spaces. We told President Obama after Charleston that he should name white supremacist groups as part of that counterterrorism effort by the U.S. government. He felt pressured enough that he could not name it as a terrorist group at that time. And we're saying now they have to be named as part of these terrorist groups because we have to recognize them for who they are. They're an enemy of our country, an enemy of our religion, and we have to deal with them. There's a group called Life After Hate. Life After Hate rehabilitates white supremacists, and it's a great group. They actually got a grant by Obama in 2016. President Trump, when he took power, rescinded the grant. Again, because his ideology was, well, that's not a real problem. And I think we as a country, we as people of faith, have to say that terrorism has no race. Terrorism has no religion. Terrorism should not be validated by any political power. So we are against Middle East terrorists, and we are against white supremacist terrorism. And unless we do that, we are going to allow terrorists to dictate the terms between religions. And that is why it's important to be here today. Another reason why it's important to be here today, other than the Southern hospitality that I enjoy when I come to Atlanta and this church in particular, and this is something I think is true for each and every one of us. You know, we try to get on to the media and think we have to be on CNN and we have to be on MSNBC, God forbid if we're ever on Fox News, but we have to get that message out, or we have to meet with the powerful politicians or the powerful businessmen to change the world. The Quran tells me invite people to the work of your Lord. So it's not about religion or your religion per se. It's about all of our religions. And therefore, if God tells you to go to meet with people who are powerless as opposed to the powerful, that is our work. And therefore, the message of peacemaking within religion will only happen within churches like this and the mosques down the street, which is having a town hall at 3 p.m., or the synagogue. That is where change will take place. Then we go to the media, then we go to our politicians and say we demand the truth on these issues and to stop dividing our country along racial and religious lines. Change will happen from the ground and with people like you and Ed and me working together for a better tomorrow.
Now, I want to give some time for some questions, but there's one other point that we need to talk about, and that is all the furor that was around the Congresswoman's statement and critique. And I'd like for you just to kind of unpack for us some of the terrain of all of that that you deal with all the time.
And I think you know, Ed, that I've dealt with it many times, in our 30 years of working together. I started when I was 10. So the idea is that we do not know how to talk about the policies of the state of Israel as a country. There is a fear about talking about it. And there is a fear of when we talk about it, that we exacerbate the problem of anti-Semitism. And anti-Semitism is a real danger. And the worst war crimes in the 20th century happened in the Holocaust. And anyone who denies the Holocaust is denying truth and denying humanity and what happened at that time. So we are as much involved in removing that kind of religious bigotry and racism and xenophobia because we don't ever want it to rise again. When it comes to the state of Israel and the politics of Israel and the Middle East, the United States Congress has not allowed for a single congressional hearing on the issue of Palestinian rights. AIPAC, one of the most formidable lobbies in the United States, is involved in smear tactics and undermining of any person, whether it's Christian, Muslim, or Jew, who works to change the way we as Americans should be talking about the Middle East. And there was an Orthodox Jewish rabbi, Orthodox Jewish member of the State Department, an ambassador, Daniel Kurtzer, who was attacked by these right-wing groups because he was saying we need to start talking about a Palestinian state. I was at the California Democratic Party in 1988, and I sponsored a resolution for a Palestinian state. 2 members of Congress called me anti-American and anti-Semitic, simply because I wanted to talk about having a Palestinian state within the Democratic Party. So these are real issues that happen to this day. And Ilhan Omar is now that symbol of a country and members of our country that want to talk about that issue, that want to talk about the word justice and make that a lexicon, part of the lexicon in what is happening in the Congress, not just about economic interests in the Middle East and oil interests in the Middle East and how we have to only support stable rulers in the Middle East who are all tyrants that lead to anti-Americanism, that lead to more injustice. So we have to change that somehow. And she as a person tried, she made a mistake, she apologized and said that she herself needs to learn about the tropes of anti-Semitism, but it's now bigger than her. The issue now is about how we as a country, and especially on campuses, there's something called BDS, Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions, against the government of Israel for the occupation of Palestinian territories in the West Bank and the siege of Gaza. BDS is a form of nonviolent resistance. We're always preaching about nonviolence. Yet when these students take on a form of nonviolence, they are criminalized for their activity. And the first bill in the U.S. Congress was a bill to say that BDS could lead to criminal investigation and some kind of punishment in terms of fines and maybe even time in prison. And that is an outrage. That should be an outrage to every American who says, you know, we were involved in the civil rights movement. We were involved in the anti-apartheid movement. We're involved in every movement for human rights in the country, but we cannot be involved in this human rights issue called Palestine. So this is an anathema to what we as Americans stand for, and therefore we're saying that BDS should be defended as simply part of our First Amendment rights, and we will challenge it in courts. So it's a complex issue, obviously in terms of the history, but when you get stuck in history, you will never find a solution. You have to look to the future. So what is the best for our future as Americans? What is the best for the future of the Middle East? If the future of the Middle East is now saying that Saudi Arabia and Egypt, Saudi Arabia run by a man who butchers journalists in a consulate, and Egypt run by a military dictator, that those are the two moderate states of the Middle East, and these are the two reformers of the Middle East, then we're in trouble. We're going to get in more trouble. And the best way to respond to trouble, as John Lewis taught us, is to create good trouble by resisting and by saying it's wrong. And then whatever consequences there are, we'll accept those consequences by continuing to work for what we believe is right, by what we believe is part of our faiths, to work for the human dignity of all people. So that, to me, is what the situation of Ilhan Omar represents. And as I said, the issue is bigger than her now. She may not get reelected. They're actually going to run opponents in her primary, Democrats, against her. And by the way, this is another issue, and I know we don't talk politics, but this is very important for us. If we don't get our act together and we become divided over these issues, then I'm afraid that right-wing nationalism will win again in 2020. 2020, we as a people have to figure out how to stitch these disparate groups together, but they believe in racial equality. They believe in civil rights. Nancy Pelosi, I believe, is trying to do that. I think we should support her, and we should not let people divide us like that, or let ourselves be divided over this issue, whether you're Jew, Christian, or Muslim.
Before we open it to questions, can you talk about why you're here in town, what you're doing this afternoon or this evening?
There was a person named Diane Mott who called me 6 months ago. Diane is suffering from terminal cancer. She lived in Turkey back in the 70s, and she lived in Syria and Lebanon. And she said, Muslims treated me so well when I lived there. And that's something anyone who travels to the Middle East notices, that the people are very different from the government, and it's very different from what we see in the news today. And she says, now I see Muslims being mistreated in America, and I want to give back. So she wants to support, through a gift to the Muslim Public Affairs Council, an attempt to have dialogue with churches, and friendly churches like this church, but more importantly, churches who don't know us. And those would be the evangelical churches. Those would be the more, the churches more towards this conservative side. So we are going to launch a program, and it will be a pilot effort tonight at Grace Church in Snellville. And that was really the purpose of my visit to Atlanta, was to come to that church. And then I told Ed, and Ed said, well, you better come and speak to my church. I said, oh yeah, I would love to do that, and speak to Ed and be with him in hope. And Ed, by the way, when he was with us, every Ramadan he would fast with us. And I said, you know, Ed, you're more of a Muslim than the Muslims I know. It's just that your last name is Bacon. We got to figure something out. So, and then he would say, and you're more of a Christian than a lot of Christians that I know. And I think that's the reality, is that, you know, religious affiliation sometimes is a very artificial term. But when I meet a person of faith, there's that connection. First of all, we're all created in one spirit of God. And he breathed that spirit into every human being. Second of all, we are following the same God. We're just following him differently. And we follow, really, the path of Jesus. We may disagree on the nature of the creed about Jesus, which it's a significant difference. But in terms of what we're trying to practice, it's exactly the same thing. And so that's the message that we're trying to bring about. And that's also a reform, not just for Muslims, but for all Abrahamic followers of the Abrahamic faiths. And that's why I'm here today, as part of that, responding to the call of God and not worrying if we're not going to be on the major networks or even in the White House, but being with the people and being with anybody who needs us to be there, to give them hope for a better future, to give them this example of togetherness, and to give them the message, what we believe our religion is really about, which is surrendering to God. That we have our human biases and that hold us back, but God is telling us, here's a better way, and you have to surrender and then follow his path towards that better way.
I'll never forget this Methodist brother in Florida wanted to burn Qurans and tear them up and all that kind of stuff. And what we would try to do is every time something like that would erupt, we would try to, because the fear-mongering is always rushing in times like that, would be to get a Muslim friend to come in and teach. And so I asked Layla, Dr. Marayati, his wife, who's an OBGYN for a lot of women in the parish, to come, and because she reads the Quran every day and has a rich life of prayer, just amazing, much holier than Salam. And so I asked her to come and teach a series. And I asked Layla, I said, Layla, what's the essence of Islam? I love to ask people, you know. She says, oh, I'm trying to develop my God consciousness. And I thought, that's what we're all doing, developing our God consciousness is really something. So let's have some questions. Okay, we've got a microphone ready to come to you, and all we need for you to do is raise your question. And aren't y'all impressed how the sound is getting better and better and better? We're working on this thing. It is so much better today. Please, Ann.
Hi, Salam, thank you so much. We're so blessed by your presence. In Atlanta today, there are at least 4 very intentional, invitational initiatives: the Islamic Speakers Bureau, the Islamic Leadership Class, One Atlanta, our regional welcoming community, One Region, and then our interfaith for, oh, hello, I can scream. Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Anyway, the 4
treat it
initiatives.
like a flashlight.
Woo-hoo. For Islamic Speakers Bureau, our Islamic Leadership Class, One Region Welcoming Atlanta, and our Interfaith Children's Movement. But they're all still relatively small in that inclusive and invitational nature. I would love to hear from you some other communities from which we can learn, that have learned how to broaden that welcoming ring for our Islamic friends.
Well, what was the question at the end? Was she wants to learn about what?
Broaden the range.
Broaden the range.
How do we just bring more and more people in for the conversation you're talking about?
Well, just another event that is was scheduled just within the last 24 hours, and I invite all of you to attend. It's about 2 miles away. It's at Masjid Farouk, and it's a town hall meeting on what happened in New Zealand. And I think New Zealand was horrific. It was a tragedy. Here you are, you go to mosque, and you're kneeling and bowing to the Almighty, to the Creator. And instead of getting that serenity that you sought, that you hear instead of that, you hear someone spraying you with bullets. And for those, especially the kids who were in the mosque at that time, to watch somebody die in front of you, or blood spilling in your sanctuary, must be a very traumatic effect and impact. And I think we as a community, Muslim community, and then the broader community as well, are suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. We have seen war for too long, and we have seen religious groups bless war for too long. There's not a single war in the Middle East that has gotten us anything and gotten us anywhere. And so I think the idea is we shouldn't just be having interfaith dialogue for the sake of interfaith dialogue. Mm-hmm. We don't gather here just, to practice our rituals. The rituals are important. The sermon is important. But it is that reminder to get out there and to do work. Mm-hmm. So this is a way of deputizing everybody to be that leader in the community to do God's work. And so I think religious conversations and interfaith work should center around important issues, whether it's gun violence, war, violence against women, and especially when it's done in the name of religion, freedom and democracy and human rights. These are the issues that Muslims and Christians and Jews and Hindus and Buddhists and people of all faiths, atheists, should come around and say, this is why I am here. Yes, it's nice to have breaking of the fast during Ramadan. It's nice to come here on Easter and Christmas. It's nice to go to the synagogue on Passover and enjoy each other's rituals and enjoy the food that comes with it. But it's got to be more than that. It's got to be more than, I know my Muslim, here's my Muslim, and I'm going to show him to you. It's, guys, here's an important message. And here's a Muslim, and here's a Christian, and here's a Jew that have an important message for all of us. Now, what is it that we can do with it in developing an agenda after that? And so it should create that sense of leadership within the religious community.
Very good. Please.
I was very interested to hear, I read last week that the Australian courts gave a landmark case allowing Aboriginal Australians to sue for land rights, and opens up billions of access. And I wanted to see if you'd heard any connection between that, which passed earlier last week, and the connection between this act. Have you heard any kind of link between the Australian that went to New Zealand to do this particular act? And then could you speak a little bit more about the connections between white supremacy and threats to power? And is there a possible link between that landmark case and what happened, and then how that happens around the world?
It's interesting because I see this problem of white supremacy as it relates to Islam and Muslims. I think they're choosing Muslims as the easy targets because we are political untouchables. Not only are we political untouchables, we are still invisible. I mean, when's the last time you saw a representative of a Muslim organization speak with the president or with a member of Congress, or invited to a major congressional hearing? We're talking about the Muslim ban and refugees. We're talking about the Middle East. We're talking about the issues involving terrorism all the time. So we're talking about Muslims. We're never talking to Muslims. We're not inviting Muslims to the table to have that conversation. And then that is reflected in the use of land for house of worship, not just in Australia and New Zealand, but here as well. There are so many mosques that don't get the permit because some groups say, you're not a real religion. You're an ideology, you're not a religion. That's the crux of the matter. They're trying to define Islam as something that is a political cult. And when you read their literature, that's how they describe us. So we're being dehumanized and demonized as a result. In fact, there was a case in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, where they tried to build a mosque, and the people in the city argued that point, and the civil rights section of the Department of Justice had to come and tell the courts in Murfreesboro, no, Islam is a religion. And so it got to that point here in America. And so that's why we have to, we're not here to proselytize. God knows there are more than enough Muslims in the world today. There are 1.5 billion Muslims. If there are, one or two more or one or two less, that's up to God and it's up to people. But how do we make peace? By seeing the humanity in each other. That is the most important part. And then that's reflected in land use cases, whether it's there or here. It's also important so that Muslims don't live in America or in Europe or in New Zealand and Australia, for that matter, as ghettos. That is the worst thing that can happen for us. In Europe, Muslims live in ghettos. They live in Turkish ghettos in Germany, in Algerian ghettos in France, in Indo-Pakistani ghettos in the UK. We in America don't live in those ghettos as Muslims. We are well integrated. We're actually doing very well in terms of our kids are going to the best schools. We're getting the best jobs. But we're still isolated and excluded from the national discourse. And I think that is the challenge that we have to get through, that danger of being invisible and excluded and demonized and dehumanized that will lead, I think, to, unfortunately, more problems for us as a country.
We're going to have to stop so we can start worship in 15 minutes, but on behalf of all these wonderful people, Salam, you have really graced us with your presence. Thank you, my friend.
Thank you. I think for Ed, there's the afterlife that God promises us, paradise and all the good stuff. So for Ed, there was Pasadena, and then there's Atlanta, which is his afterlife.
We love you here, brother. Come back.